So I want to tell a story about Pluto and Neptune, who are right now in a very, very tight sextile together. And the funny thing is, there's nothing really new about Neptune and Pluto in a sextile. I mean, they've been in a sextile since the 1940s, and that's going to persist for at least another decade and a half. So you might ask yourself, well, why talk about this? You know, what's important about this? Well, in this short video, I'm going to run through the Neptune and Pluto story together, like the cycle that they go through from when they come into a conjunction and to where they are now, what they're bringing in with their influences and how they might affect us, because they are at the far outer reaches of our solar system and as such are quite unconscious energies that we come across. And of course, we all have Neptune and Pluto in our chart, and we all have Neptune and Pluto transiting somewhere in our chart as well. And these transits I always find quite difficult. I've had Pluto go over a lot of my chart, like my ascendant, my Uranus, my ascendant, my Mars, my Neptune, my North Node, my Sun, my Mercury, and my Venus. In fact, that was a really, really deep level of transformation. That was the moment when I met my husband. So I know from my own experience, when Pluto goes over like your sun and your ascendant, the changes that come in are pretty intense. So let's unpack the meaning of these two together. And I'm going to take you on a story of each of these planets and what they're doing together, and also take you into the past as well, so we understand what their conjunction was about, because that is where they created their seed, the seed of them two together, and we can see what's come from it. Okay, so let's dive in. If you're new to this channel, by the way, my name's Louisa. One of the things I like the most about astrology is utterly geeking out about planets, mythology, and also the cycles of time and how they make these really cool patterns. I never get bored of it. So let's start with Neptune first. Who is he and what does he rule? What's he involved in? So he's the god of the oceans, and it's very much about our devotion to life at its highest expression. He brings us into a sense of union at his lowest expression. He helps us forget who we are, when we really can't face ourselves. And, personally, I think he's bringing in all these different themes around imagination and creativity. You could even say that he's a higher harmonic of love, bringing in unconditional love. But I also recognize that he is absolutely about empathy and longing and intuition, but dissolution as well. So he's dissolving things. I mean, water is absolutely an amazing substance to dissolve things. That's why when we get stains on our clothes, we wet our clothes to help to bring it all up. From a civilization perspective, Neptune is really showing us all these amorphous energies that we really can't quite control or necessarily understand. Religion and spiritual movements, these things that aren't actually seen, but they're felt. Myths and cinema is really important. Like in the charts of famous actors, it's not unheard of for them to have a very, very strong Neptune. They are in the game of telling stories, but also pretending to be somebody else. So there's a lot about, where things are designed to maybe distract from what's really going on. Like actors, they are playing a part. We're all playing a part, in fact. Neptune can really show us the masks that we wear all the time, and also the masks that we forget that we're actually wearing, where we end up lying to ourselves. Collectively, then, we've got the sort of mass psychosis of humanity, our psychology, our collective ideals, that sense of global compassion, where compassion at a personal level becomes absolutely compassion at a huge level. In this, we've got virtual worlds because it's largely unseen. If you think of the ocean, you really can't see beyond your hand if you do any kind of diving or snorkeling or swimming in the oceans. The moment you're in it, you are in the great mystery. And it can be quite dangerous. I go swimming in the oceans at the moment, currently in the Atlantic Ocean, most days, and I'm loving it. But I only go as far as I feel safe. When you get a little bit further out, there's just so many inherent dangers that we just don't know about. And that could be true of religion and spirituality as well. All the things that we get pulled into or feel that we're pulled into, these mysteries, they can actually take us out of ourselves, out of our knowing, and into a place of danger, but also potentially into a place of awakening. I would also put in pharmaceuticals into this category, because we're talking about things that we don't necessarily know and can't necessarily see, all these magical potions. It also incorporates drugs and all sorts of different energies that we can get and feel a change in our state. So Neptune, through design, through music, through acting, but also through substance, can absolutely change the way we're experiencing our reality. And that dream set can happen if you've done a trip, for instance, or if you have mushrooms. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about. A core question, I would say, is what future can we imagine? What are we imagining? That's a real sort of Neptunian thing, because our imagination can take us anywhere. It can take us up high. It can take us really to low places as well. So Neptune absolutely brings in this energy of a changing picture. Nothing's set in stone. Now we've got Pluto, who is the god of the underworld, and hidden wealth. Everything returns to the ground eventually. We'll get buried, or even if we get burnt and cremated, we often end up being blown into the wind or put into the ocean, and it all comes back to Pluto. He's really showing us our shadow work, the sides of us that we absolutely really don't want to see, and the things that we will use a lot of power and control to try and hide. So with Neptune, it's like an unconscious unknowing. With Pluto, often we are really trying to control a situation because of what the truth might reveal to us. Transformation, death, like the death of the ego, the rebirth of a new persona, trauma and resilience. These are all real Pluto themes. And if you've had Pluto going over a vast part of your chart, like I have indeed, you'll go through a lot of resilience training. You may even, and I say resilience training like we actually volunteer for it consciously, but like when I was going through all of my Pluto transits, I noticed that my life around me was collapsing. Now I understand retrospectively that I was really wanting my life to collapse in the ways that it had, because they were untenable. They weren't representing something that I could understand. And, there was a part of me that really didn't want them. But, Pluto is almost like a giant compost bin. He's composting your experience and turning it into another possibility. So it really is resilience and transformation at its core. So it brings about deep healing, and it can really bring some massive breakdowns and breakthroughs. Brings us back to our authenticity when it's, when it works beautifully. Now, from a collective perspective, you need to think about the power structures, because Pluto loves power and he likes to get the last word. So think of all the different authority structures that you've come across in your life where you don't get to have the last word. So, it really shows who's got the power. It's also quite hidden. So like crime psychology comes in, investigative work, all the financial power structures. Obviously, he is all about hidden wealth and hidden control. So it really can show the rise and fall of empires and the destruction of economic situations, and then the rebuilding after. Also nuclear power, if you think of Pluto, plutonium, archaeology, like digging things up. He's a real transformer, and anything that comes down, is broken down, is part of a Pluto theme. And so he's really asking us what can no longer remain the same, what needs to change. And that's what I found in my life. I was living a life that really wasn't matching what I authentically felt about myself or felt about my direction. And so Pluto and a bit of Uranus came to absolutely transform that for me. And maybe you've had those experiences yourself. I'm sure you have. So if we have a look we've looked at each of these planets now at a sort of quick level. I want to understand now what their seed pattern is, like the seed. If you imagine like a zygote or an embryo, like that. In actual fact, the very first moment when a sperm and an egg come together, that like moment of conception, these two different influences come together to create a new being or a new energy. That's what we've got every time that Neptune and Pluto make a conjunction. They are creating a little baby of themselves, that potential energy. In fact, every time a planet comes together with another planet, it's creating a seed point. And some of them have really long, slow, overarching effects, and some of them are done within a month. All the ones with moons are absolutely started, they're seeded, and then they return back to reseeding a month later. Now, this seed story started a long, long time ago, about 493 years ago. And right now, Neptune and Pluto are in a Gemini story. The last time they came together was in the sign of Gemini. The time before that, it was in the sign of Gemini. They came together in 1892 in the sign of Gemini. And so you can also say, like, they're two energies that are coming together, are coming to tell a story of some sort. If you think of the energy of Gemini, there's a lot about storytelling. There's a lot about sowing a narrative. If you think of Gemini, Gemini is naturally about schools and social experiences and how we learn about the world from each other. Gemini is a very interactive sign that helps us to see polarity. If you think of the twins, you've got the not to suggest that there's always a good twin and a naughty twin. The old idea that Gemini is two-faced, which, by the way, I think is horrible, a horrible idea. But it's there to show the idea of duality. Gemini is a sign that helps us to find out about duality, but also communicate and talk, because otherwise you're talking to yourself. So you have to talk to other people. And once there's another person, there's the place where the conversation starts, the place where the conversation ends. There is always going to be duality and polarity when we have more than one person communicating to itself. And so, this is a Neptune and Pluto story, which we'll talk about the influence of, but it's about the story that they're creating together. They are here to create stories that change the way mankind sees itself. It's a very, very social sign. Gemini is all about noticing and experiencing. And Gemini is also an air sign, and air circulates. And it's a mutable air sign, and mutable air circulates faster. And it's a lot more interesting. It doesn't go in a straight line. It's curvy. It goes around the houses. So this is an interesting seed point for sure. So let's have a look at these exact sextiles then and what they were bringing in. If you think, Neptune is sort of glamorous and tells a story and can deceive, but also delight, and it can create in a way that's interesting, and Pluto can bring in power. So the sextiles from 1950 to 1956, these were times of post-war confidence where there was this idea of rebuilding up from the family to look at this sort of like a charismatic future. But in terms of music, music and film, which is a real Neptune thing, we were having like crooners, rock and roll, the golden age of cinema, which was pretty glamorous. There was a real sort of uplifting feel to it. Doris Day, and so on and so forth. Then when we had the sextiles in 1976 to 1986, the 21 of them, but they go across two different sets of signs. So for instance, between 1976 and 1983, they were across the signs of Libra. Pluto was in Libra and Neptune was in Sagittarius. And that was a time when global travel was becoming a lot more popular, when philosophy, belief systems, relationship, equality, and social contracts were coming in. And from a musical perspective, we had punk, we had disco, we had reggae, and the idea that there was a stadium, it was growing. There were films about adventure like Indiana Jones, Star Wars, E.T., Superman. They're all sort of taking us out of ourselves. Neptune was in Sagittarius at that time, which was going on that big adventure. And then between 83 and 86, there was Pluto in Scorpio, and Neptune moving into Capricorn. And then it becomes corporate. So music, think in terms of Michael Jackson and Madonna, and the idea of the music industry as an actual industry itself. It became became a real big deal. MTV, became really popular. And during those times, there were films about hidden power, like The Matrix and Silence of the Lambs and things like that. So these are all the energies that are coming up in those times. Now we are into the 2026 to 2032, where we've got Neptune in Aries. So I think some of the storytelling is going to be about heroes and people standing, people being independent, people being in their sovereign power. And Pluto in Aquarius talking about the brotherhood of humanity, but maybe also how humanity is managed, because Pluto does like to control. So you can already see that these stories were becoming very defined in these periods, these previous two periods. I remember like 83 to 86, like the rise of capitalism, the idea, obviously it's been around for a long time, but I remember those early years in the 80s as being a time when my parents were buying gadgets. There was Betamax videos, then I can't even remember, VHS they were called. There were like loads of different ways of capturing information and sharing information. And you might be, if you're around my age, you might even have recorded the radio onto little cassette tapes. I used to record the top 30, and try and get the DJ's voice out of it. That's always, that's a common theme, with these times where we could buy gadgets to help us to capture the music and to capture the film so we could watch it again. So there was this idea of choice. And now we're in, 2026, where music and video, who owns the rights to these? Who can access things? AI is making things possible. And it's really like, I wonder what happens when everything can be replicated. We are living in a time where ideas can be brought forwards through AI. And, I wonder what that's going to mean for talent. I really do wonder, what is it, if you've got a talent that you want to share, how are you sharing it from an absolute personal perspective? And of course, Neptune in Aries is all about the idea of the person, the ego. So we're definitely on a big journey. And I imagine these years from 2026 to 32 to be really incredible. And by incredible, do I mean incredible, woohoo, that's brilliant? Or do I mean incredible as in we're going to go through some big shifts? I think that's the one I'm referring to. And of course, right now we've got the boat energy, also known as the basket. But this is going to be carrying us forwards. So this is huge. Now, this is going to change, but not until 2061. So we are still in this seed story that's in the sextile, and the sextile is about Neptune and Pluto working together. But by 2061, the energy is going to be breaking down between Pluto and Neptune. And so there will be most likely a feeling of conflict between the storytellers and the people who are controlling things. Personally, I hope that happens a little bit sooner than that. Who knows? I think things speed up with consciousness. Anyway, let's look a little bit deeper. So what has emerged since the conjunction? So I've mentioned some of those examples. If you think Neptune is imagining stories and Pluto is transforming those stories, Gemini spreading those stories. Remember, Gemini was where they came together. Here's some of the things I think have actually come about since the late 19th century. So worldviews and communications have really, really changed. And because it's about stories, communication, that's a very Gemini thing. Like before this conjunction, we had newspapers from the 1700s, and telegrams had come in the early 1900s, about 50 or 60 years ago, before this conjunction. And just before this conjunction, telephones. But after this conjunction, telephones, became a real thing. And then radio in the 1920s, lots of households had those from there on in. And that's gone through to the internet, to cell phones, to social media, to AI, So stories become global very quickly, like just like that. So the flow of information, the circulation, remember Gemini is about circulation. The circulation of stories has become global and it's become big business. The unconscious mind, I think, is another big thread here. The rise of psychology and the idea that we are psychological beings, that we're individuals. And that's not to say it didn't happen before, but these two have really sort of like come in. Again, Neptune is quite unconscious and is about the invisibility of things. So Sigmund Freud and his ideas about the id, the ego, the super ego, RID, sorry, Carl Jung and the shadow and the idea of integration work. This is really talking about the psychology of human experience. And of course, mysticism, theosophy, and things like that are also energies that I would say are very much about Neptune and Pluto working together. Now, we've also got science and invisible realities. So X-rays, radioactivity, electrons, all these things we can't actually see with our real eyes. And then the big one, Pasteur died just after this conjunction, but his germ theory has really dominated a lot of human history. But Béchamp was also talking about terrain theory, the idea that if your terrain is dirty, like if your inner body, if the terrain is not good, you'll get ill. Whereas Pasteur is saying it's got nothing to do with the terrain, it's about the germs. And so these invisible realities have determined a lot about life. I would say Béchamp is coming more and more popular now as people are beginning to think about their living ecosystems, like as above, so below. We notice that when our terrain is clean, like in our gardens, when everything's clean, everything works well. So it's interesting, isn't it? We've lived in a world where people have used pesticides on our foods, and mass agriculture has absolutely supported that. Now maybe we're coming into a time when this reality is becoming a lot more visible, but these are invisible realities that have dominated humanity for a long time. From ideas to influence, religion, spirituality, philosophy, politics, it's all brought our idea and our culture experience of ourselves to the fore. Now, I recognize that these all sound very ninth house, or very Sagittarian, and they are. But the thing with Gemini is, Gemini is the third sign of the zodiac. And the third house has a lot to do with our community, our local community, what is known versus the ninth house, what is unknown. What we've really got here is all of these unknown, possibly invisible realities, like philosophy. Can you actually see it? No, but you live it. Can you see politics? No, you can't, but you can see the effects of politics. Same with religion, same with spirituality. These invisible realities have been made known through this Gemini energy that both Neptune and Pluto are in the story of right now. And then I think, this is a huge topic, like who has your attention? I think Neptune and Pluto working together have found ways to capture attention, because if you capture the attention, you capture thought, you make that thought real, even if it is or isn't. And then all of a sudden, that's the new narrative that everybody works to. And then Pluto gets his control of the community. So, we're talking, and that's not to say that any of these things in and of themselves are bad, by the way. You have to find your own way in the world and know what feels right for you. But schools are educating people according to certain ideas. The news, again, is telling us what's happening from a certain perspective. Media, social media, celebrity, also telling us what what they think is right. And of course, they've got glamour, which is a real Neptune thing. Film, sports, music, it's all informing us, everything around us. We are in this very strong Neptune-Pluto reality that started in Gemini, and it's sending stories global just like that. And there's the influence, a little idea to mass influence. So I think this is one of the things that is really strong about Neptune and Pluto. So what are they asking? Neptune's asking what can we imagine? Pluto, what must we change? So they're saying, how does imagination transform civilization? Well, we can see that here now, I think. And so, yeah, their great conversation is about changing humanity one idea at a time. And because they've met in the sign of Gemini, and the next one will be in Gemini, and the next one will be in Gemini, because they, they shuffle through signs very, very slowly, but they are influencing humanity. And so if you think of Gemini, and that kind of third energy, that third house energy, a lot of it's about consensus. It's about having communications. Like, Gemini is known, and through little discussions and facts, but not necessarily the context, where we look at black and white things, but we don't look at the gray. We don't actually think about the morality behind it. We just think, oh, yes or no. Like, everything is a binary decision. You're going to do this or you're going to do that. But there's so many shades of gray. And right now, I think, if you felt like you've been pushed into a binary decision, like, are you going to vote this way or this way? You might actually find that actually these binary decisions are actually leading to the same thing anyway. So it's interesting where there's consensus and agreement. It's also showing where we can be controlled. That's Pluto, through consensus. And so I also think Pluto in Aquarius has been bringing in a lot of transformation about social things, but it's also brought in a lot of social shame and pressure. And Neptune's ideals are, I think right now in Aries, about to lead us from a place of spirituality. And that's very compelling. So it's going to be interesting to see what actually comes about of these energies. My question is, how is this going to transform us by 2032? What's going to happen? Because we're at the start of the next series of sextiles. And they're going to be rolling out. There's 13 of them. And these, when they come in, it's going to be a time when energies suddenly get moving again, and transforming again. And of course, this first one, in the boat, in that basket formation, I think is really setting us on a new trajectory. But by the 2060s, when we're in the Neptune square Pluto story, things really will have transformed, and who knows where this is going. I really don't know. And I wonder if you know where this is leading us. We're all born into this story. Like I said earlier, everyone from the 1940s has got this aspect. But my question to you, and this is where you might want to choose to reflect in your chart, like, where are your Neptune and Pluto in your chart? Are they in a really prominent position? Which houses are they in? Like mine are in the 11th house and the 2nd. So that will give you an idea. If you understand the houses and what they mean, that will give you a clue as to how you might use this energy. You might also ask yourself, is anything transiting my natal Pluto or my natal Neptune right now? Because that will also give you a clue as to what's going on. And finally, where are Pluto and Neptune transiting in your chart right now? Are they connecting in their real-time position to something in your birth chart? Because anywhere where you're noticing some prominence, that's describing your story with the whole influence. Like, in all of this, really, what this is saying to me, because we're all born with this sextile, we're all part of the spread of information. We're all part of the story of humanity. Like, we can't opt out of it. So I wonder how it appears to you in your chart. So that brings me to the end of my Neptune Pluto story. I hope you found it interesting. And who knows where it's taking us, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Anyway, lots of love to you. Take care and speak to you soon. Bye for now.